Hello and welcome. Today I'm going to teach you how to do a zombie top-down game. In this tutorial we're going to learn inheritance, how to play sounds, how to do grenades, and a state machine. With sounds we're going to have play once sounds, and we're going to have looping sounds in the background. You'll notice that when the wave ends, we've got a lot more zombies, and each wave will just increase. You'll also learn how to do a machine gun, with flash, and single shot. So let's get into it. So this project will be up on GitHub if you want to download it, the link is in the description. So start a new project, save and no 2D as main, and we're going to put in the inputs. So go to project settings and input. What we want to use is ASDW, shift, escape, MB right, MB left. Then what I want you to do is just put in the values. It's going to take a while, so I'll just cut this out. Now this is done, we're going to create the floor. So close this, make a new node, and we'll call this floor. I'm just going to drag in the floor, and you'll notice it's quite large. The player will look quite small on this, so we want to decrease the size of this sprite. So we'll go to the floor, go to its transform, and on its scale, I'm going to say 0.5 for both X and Y. Now what we're going to do is just paint this on. So if you go to the top corner, press Ctrl D, drag, Ctrl D, drag, Control D, just so the camera border's finished. And I'll cut to the end. Now that I'm happy that the floor is now covering the camera, I'm going to go to the floor, I'm going to go to Z index, and I'll have this at -5. So basically, the higher the number, the closer to your eye it is, and the lower the number, the further away from your eye it is. So let's save this in our objects folder. So now I want you to make a new scene. It's a no 2D. I want you to attach an animated sprite. I want you to touch an area 2D with a collision shape of a circle and a timer. And we'll make sure the timer is set to 1 shot. What we're going to do next is populate the animated sprite. Make a new sprite frames and then click it. We're going to call this layer dead. In fact, we're going to make all our animations now. Layer idle, layer walk, zombie walk 1, zombie dead 1, zombie dead 2, zombie walk 2. Let's put in our animation. So we're going to go to here, which is opening a sprite sheet. I've got a sprite sheet here with all our zombie and player animations. Double click on that, and you'll notice we're on dead. So let's select these, add the frames, do the same again. For idle, I'm only using 1 frame, and it's this one. And for walk, I use these frames. Make sure that you do the speed to which you like. And we'll do the same again, but for the zombies. So zombie dead 1, we'll call this zombie 1. Oops, make sure it's on the dead animation. Then we want to go to zombie walk 1, which is this one. And then we'll do the same for the other zombie. One last thing on this, you'll notice that we've got a loop thing here. We don't want to loop our dead animation, so make sure we don't do that. Go to your zombie deads. They won't loop now once playing. When saving this object, make sure that you'll save it in a separate folder called parent objects. This is a good way of determining what's a parent and what's a child. Now that's done, let's make the blood particles. So make a new scene, overnode and particles. Make sure it's particles 2D and not CPU particles. And what we're going to do is just call this blood particles. And I'll make this 80. Make our lifetime 0.4. Go down to your drawing. We're going to turn local quads off. We're going to then add in a process material. And then in our emission shape, I'm just going to make this a sphere. Make it about 7 in a direction. Just turn the directions off. Red 180. Go to gravity. We're going to turn gravity off. Then go down to initial velocity. We're going to change this to 75. Then I'm going to go down to scale. And then I'm just going to add in a curve. We could just do this. If I zoom in a little bit closer, you can see what we've got here. Then go down to textures, and we'll put in our texture. And every time we shoot, this is what's going to happen, is we're going to turn on 1 shot, and you'll see it's like a blood shot. Please mess around with the variables, get something better than this, but it's just for speed of this tutorial. Then save that into your objects folder down here. Now what we're going to do is go back to your entity. We're going to go to the entity, and we're going to attach a script. Put that in your script folder. And what I'm going to do is just remove this and paste in code. Now you'll notice we've used class name entity here, and the whole purpose of this is to make sure that Godot can recognize the entity as its own object which we can now inherit from. And I'll give you an example of this. So if we were to go and make a new script and we go to the inherits, you'll notice that now we've got the entity. Now what this just means is this is still a no2D, but it retains these values. So let's explain what these variables do. They should be self-explanatory, but we've got our life, obviously, we've got our move speed. The entity name is going to be the very first word of each animation. They share stuff, so we've got walk, dead, walk, dead. So in the zombie, if I want to have one script for two zombies, I just have to call an entity zombie1 or zombie2. This will be explained further when we do the zombie class. We now have remove entity equals false, and when we set this to true, we'll slowly fade out the entity and delete it. And we've got our can hurt. This is more for the player, so when the player gets hurt, we want to have a bit of time delay until he can get hurt again. And of course, we're going to get our animation and our timer just so we can reference it in code. We have then got the blood resource that we just made, and the reason I've got this is that we're going to load it in this script once a zombie gets hit, then in a ready, so when this entity exists, we're going to connect the timer to a signal called handle removing. So let's put that in now. When we set the timer, once that timer times out, handle moving will be executed, and we'll make sure that remove entity is true, and we'll just lerp the alpha channel down to 0, and once it gets far enough, we'll delete it, so that's that fade out effect. And lastly, we'll put this code in. So when physics process happens 60 times a second, we're going to make sure that, hey, if we've got life, then we want to handle movement. If we haven't got life, then obviously we must be dead. And then we've got a remove entity. So we don't want to just instantly remove the entity. We want to then say, right, handle remove an entity, which is here. So what happens is the timer executes this function first, and then the physics process sets it up, so it just loops all the way until it's ended. So you notice we've got a class called handle movement, and then we're playing it here, and that's going to be for any entity. Now when we make a new script for the zombie and the player, we are going to put handle movement in there, and what's going to happen is in the entity here, we'll actually be calling the handle movement in the player and in the zombie. We're leaving this blank here because obviously this needs like a reference to point to. And when we do put that in the player and the zombie, it will overwrite this. It's just another way of overwriting in Godot. So what we're going to do now is set up the player. And because the player is part of the entity, we want to inherit from the entity. So to do that, we're going to inherit scene. So go to main, find the entity, right click on it, find new inherited scene, click that. And there you go. We've got a zombie by default, but don't worry about that. What we're going to call this is just player. And then we'll go to the animation and we'll just put it as player idle, just for default for this one. Any node that's grayed out is to tell you that this is a child node. So we need to add some nodes to the player, which won't feature in the zombie. First thing I'm going to add is a raycast. We're going to make sure that it's on. I'm going to call this something large like that, and then 0. And then make sure that you've got collide with areas. We're going to leave bodies on, that won't matter. What we're going to do next is put our aim line in. So put a new sprite, drag in the aim line, and position how you want. And then position it at the end of the gun. And you don't have to do this, I just like it because you've got like a nice little aim line. Next we're going to put into audio stream player. And what I'm going to do is just duplicate this. One's going to be gunshot sound, this one's going to be... And then we're going to just drag the audio into the stream. So find the audio, what you want to use. Then what I like to do, because this is a little bit loud, is just turn it down a bit. Hurt player. Same again. Then I'm going to do the muzzle flash. So we need another sprite. Call this flash. Drag the flash onto it. You notice it's in the center of the player and I want it at the end of the gun, so I'm just going to move it over. And then we don't want the muzzle flash to stay on screen, so we're going to add a timer. Now go up to the player. We want to go to our node and groups and call this player. Now we've got the player sorted, let's make the zombie. So we're going to do the same as the player, but this time I'm going to go down to entity, right click, new inherited scene, and we'll just call this zombie. This will also need some nodes that don't exist in the player node, so we'll put them in here. So make a new timer. We'll call this moan timer, and then we'll make a new audio stream player, and we'll call this moan sound. Then we want to go to the moan sound inspector and make sure that we put the moan sound in. So go to our audio, and drag in the moon sound. We're going to turn this down a little bit because these sound effects are pretty loud. It's quite deafening and sometimes it just doesn't sound right. And like before, go to the zombie, we're going to go to our node, go to the group, and we'll call this zombie. So the great reason I'm doing this is that we can now loop through every object in the zombie group, which is obviously the zombies. And if there's none left, then we know that the game has finished, the wave is complete. So we want to start a new one. Another thing about inheritance is you'll notice this icon here, it's quite new. Click this, it'll take us to the parent class. So keep that in mind. We'll now set up the text object, and this is just telling the player wave complete, then waits, and then says fight. So start a new node, other node, and it'll be an animated sprite. Go to the inspector, and then we're going to add new frames. Go to the sprite sheet, find the sprite, and for this one it's just going to be 2 and 1. Select both. Make sure this is not on loop. On the speed scale, we want this quite slow, so let's make it 0.5. Now make sure the speed is 1. Now if we press play, you'll see how slow it is. So it's wave complete, fight, then the zombies spawn. So turn that off, go back to 0, and then we'll just save this as text object. Now that's finished, we're going to do our last object, grenade. So we're going to make a new animated sprite. We're going to add a new audio stream player, name that explode sounds, drag in the explode. Definitely want to turn this down a bit because it's quite a loud one. On the animated sprite, we're going to go back, go to frames, make new frames, open it, and we're going to make one called explode. Go to the sprite sheet, find this sprite. This is 8 and 6, and I'm going to select all, add the frames, and then we've got our explode animation. I'm going to change this to 50 because it's quite a long animation. If you want to demonstrate that, we can just press play. It looks quite smooth. We'll put in a new animation, call this idle. And for this, it's only one sprite, so find the grenade sprite, drag it in. So as you imagine, we've got our grenade, and if we explode it, so let's leave this on idle by default, and make sure it's on playing by default too. Save this as your explode in your objects. And now we're going to do a lot of code. So let's start with blood particles first. Put a new script on, create it, and I'm going to put in the code. So this will start the particle animation, and then what we're going to do is create a little time that waits 1 second, and after it's timed out, we will then delete. So now we're going to make a script for the game, and this is going to be loaded in the background. So make a new script, file, new script, and we'll call this game. Save that in your scripts, and now I'm going to put in some code. And what this game script is going to do is it's going to control the waves, the state machine, when to start a new wave, and then add in more zombies. So the text resource gets the complete fight text we just made, the zombie because we want to create as many zombies. Then the crosshair, which is just a sprite of a cross. Wave number, I've just put this on 6 and the amount of zombies per wave, so 6 times 5 is 30, which it starts off on. So we're just going to say wave 1, so when we first start it'll only be 5 zombies. Then we've got an enum, and this is how we're going to control our state machine. So we've got setup wave, playing wave, complete, and nothing. Our current state starts on playing wave, so as soon as you load the game up we're going to have zombies pop up. And we've got this variable called player nodes, and that's going to get the group players, and there's only going to be one node in there. And then using this variable, we'll get the first child of player nodes, which will be the player. So now you'll see it in the ready. We change our cursor, which would have been the arrow, which is by default, to the crosshair image. And this value here is the where you click, basically. So on an arrow, it's right at the top left, but I want it to be in the center of the crosshair, which I know is at 1717. Then as before, we're going to get every node in the group player. 0 index is obviously going to have to be the player. Then what we're going to do is just set up the wave straight away. And this is quite basic. So the first time we set up the wave, we know this is going to equal 5. So 1 to 5, we're going to make a new zombie instance. Then what we're going to do is make a vector 2, and we're going to just pick a random point in the room and then check if that point is close to the player. If it is close to the player, then we skip this code. If it isn't, then we place a zombie. And the reason for doing this is we don't want the zombies on top of us when they first spawn. It's too unfair. Then what we'll do is, after all that's finished, is we'll increase the wave number, so the next wave will be 10. After that, it'll be 15, etc. And I've used call deferred, so that makes sure that all this is done before calling this. And all that's happening is we change our state, which we're going to make in a second, to playing wave. So let's make that change state. And here it is. Now, this needs to be put in, so just ignore that for now. And all this is doing is we're checking our current state. If we've changed it to something different, then execute this code. If we haven't, then skip over it because we don't want to keep changing state to the same thing over and over again. And in this instance, it's going to be set up wave. So let's put in do wave complete animation and check for wave, and we'll come back to this. So as I spoke about it before, check for wave, we're just going to say, hey, get every node in zombie, and if the size, which is the count of zombies, is equal to 0, there's no zombies left, then change our state to wave complete. If we go back up to here, we can see wave complete, and what happens is we do the wave complete animation, which is the text complete fight, and then once that text is finished, we then set up the wave, and it's like a loop. So do wave complete animation, as you can see down here, is just a simple case of getting the text, put it in the middle of the screen, and just add the child. Now to check for wave, we need this to be executing every single time we're in the state check for wave. So let's do that now. So here's the physics process. Once again, it'll be run 60 times a second, and we're just going to handle state processes, current state, and if the current state is check for new wave, we'll then say, hey, if it's check for playing wave, then we'll check for new wave. This way, when we're in playing wave, we're constantly checking for the wave end. And then we've got something up here saying if we press the escape, then just quit the game. And that's everything for the game script. However, there's one more thing we need to do is to make sure this is loaded in the background at all times, is we need to go to the project settings and put it in as an auto load. Add it and make sure singleton is on. You can see that it was already added because I've done this before, but just make sure you do this process. So let's code the zombie next. Now add a script to the zombie. Make sure that it's inherited from the entity, not the node2d. And like before, this is now inherited from the entity, so it's already got the life. It's got move speed. It's got Annie. So we don't have to put in the connection to the zombie's animation because it's already done in the entity for us. Once again, you can see the importance of inheritance and how it can speed up your workflow. So I'm going to put in the top variables. We'll have the player entity, which the zombie will follow. We'll have the moan timer, so with the zombie randomly moans. We've got the moan sound, which we reference to the stream player here. And we've got the moan frequency, which is from 5 to 15. And all that means is we're doing it randomly. So anywhere from 5 seconds to 15 seconds, the zombie will moan, and then it'll wait another 5 to 15 seconds again. Now, what's a little bit different is we've put an array of an audio stream. And the reason I've done this is we can have multiple moans in one variable. So save that and we'll put them in now. So go back to the zombie and you'll notice that we've got a new thing here called sounds. If you open it up, I want to do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Go to your audio and you'll notice we've got zombie 1 to 5. So just put them in. Once that's done, save and go back to the code. When the zombie loads, we want a ready. Connect our timer to a signal called moan timeout, which we'll put up in a second. Then what we're going to do is start the timer. The zombie will have 3 lives. You can change that if you want. Obviously, the more life, the more harder it is. Each shot reduces it by 1. Move speed, I've randomed this up from 0.5 to 2, and the reason for that is that they bunch together and look really samey if you don't do it that way. This is quite important. You'll see we've got an entity name, I've got zombie, and what I'm going to do this time is turn a number 1 or 2, and then I'll add it onto the zombie, so it'll be zombie 1 or zombie 2 at the end of it. And as you remember in the animation, we've got zombie 1, zombie 2, so now we know that we can just add in _dead and _walk, and it'll work depending on which zombie entity name we have. Then like before in the game, we just get the players in the nodes. It can only be 1, so at 0 it has to be the player. We put that in. And this way the zombie can follow this node. And then any animation speed, I just randomed it just so that all the steps didn't match perfectly. Let's put in that moan timer in now. So what's going to happen is when we start the timer, we're going to check first of all, have we got life? If we haven't, we don't want to be moaning, we're dead. And then we'll do the moan, and then we'll do it from 0 to 4. The pitch, I've just changed it rapidly from like 0.2 to 1.6. We play the sound, and then we want to start the timer again, but this time we're going to start it from 0, which is 5, to 1, which is obviously 15. And lastly, I'm going to do handle movement. and you'll see that the animation will be the entity name, which will be either zombie1 or zombie2 randomly, _walk, look at the player, get the player's verbal position, and what we'll do is move towards the player at the move speed. Once the zombie is close enough to the player by 50 pixels, and if the player can be hurt, we do the player do hurt, which we'll put in the player script later on. Now you might be wondering, handle movement, or how's it being called? Because it's no physics process. Well, like before, if you go back to your entity, you can see that we've actually got it here, and we've got this blank. What's going to happen is the zombie is going to overwrite this one, and the player will also overwrite it too. And the reason for that is this code is very different from what the player's code is going to be. So when you have two entities that are similar, you want inheritance, but then if there's anything dissimilar, you want to override. So that's the zombie done. It's quite simple. So we'll go to explode. We're going to make a new script, call it explode, create, and I'm just put in the whole code. So we've got the animation direction, we've got the speed of the animation, which we're going to lerp down in the physics process down to 0. So it gives this effect of slowing down. Then in physics process, you'll see the speed, it's at 15, and we'll lerp it down to 0. So this gives a nice little grenade, moves and slowly stops. Then you'll notice down here, if speed gets to almost 0, so it's almost stopped, then we know the grenade is going to explode. So we set the animation to explode. Then we get the explode sound, which is here. We change its pitch a little bit slightly, just add variety. Then we play it. Then we also play the explode animation. Then if we go up to here, we can say from frame 10 to frame 20, any frames between them, we can hurt a zombie. And what we'll do is we'll loop through every single zombie. We'll check if that zombie is close to the explosion by 130 pixels and reduce the zombie's life to 0. So we have the zombie timer start at 1, so start the timer for 1 second. Now it's a timer which is actually part of the entity. So if we go to the entity, we can then see that it's connected to something called handle removing, and that's what it does. So we remove the entity, then we lerp the alpha channel down to 0, and once it's close enough, we then delete it. And that's all the code for the explode. So let's go to the text object now, and we're going to put in a script for this. We've got a simple count variable. I'm going to say once the text object is loaded, we're going to play it straight away. And you know it before, it's quite a slow animation. So what we're going to do is on time sprite frame change is we're going to, every time we change a frame, we'll count it. Then if the frame is equal to 2, then we'll make sure that the game state changes to setup wave. Then we will delete this object. And make sure that this actually works, we need to go to our node, go to your frame change, double click that. As you can see, it's there. So now every time a frame changes, this code will be executed. Now we're going to add a script to the player. This is going to be by far the largest script. And as before, we're going to make sure this is an entity. And put it in this. So we're going to get the raycast and we're going to get the flash timer. That's here and here. We're then going to have the grenade we've just made and preload that. Then we're going to have a flag for the player is dead. So in ready, we've got the entity name is player, the life is 5. So get parent is actually going to be our main, and we're going to get the node background loop and play it. Now we've not put that in yet, so I'm going to put it in now. So go to your main, audio stream player, background loop, find the ambient loop and drag it in. Now, one thing I've just realized is quite important is that if you want something to loop, make sure you go to your ambient loop, import, and loop is on. However, we don't want that for the other sounds. Once we play a shot, we want it to play once. So make sure you go through every single one and have a loop off. You can actually highlight all of them. They are on by default, remember that, so turn them all off. Now, like the zombie, we've got a handle movement function, and this is going to overwrite it in the entity. And this is just really simple. We're just saying look at the mouse position, move depending on your ASDW by speed, then we apply it to our global position, and then we make sure to clamp the player inside the bounds. Now I've hard-coded this in. I know that the window is 1200 by 900, but I wouldn't recommend doing that. Then after that, we're going to check are we actually moving? And we'll know that if move horizontal is greater than 0 and move vert is also greater than 0, and we use abs to turn a negative number into a positive number. Else, if we're not moving, then play idle. So this is being called from the entity class over and over again, so you don't need to worry about putting it in the physics process. However, we're going to put in now handle shooting. So what we're going to do is check, have we just pressed the right mouse button and throw a grenade? You've got infinite grenades that you want to put in a system to control how many grenades you have for each wave. Then if you press your left button, we do a single shot. And if you hold down your left button, as well as holding shift, you instantly shoot over and over again like a machine gun. We're going to do throw grenade next. And what this is going to do is get our grenade instance we've got at the top, set the grenade the same as the player. Then the grenade aimed there is going to be the direction to the mouse position. Now we need to do shot next. And do shot will get the gunshot pitch, and like before, I'm just going to mix it up so it's got more variety. We play the actual shot, and then obviously it's not going to loop, so it'll play once. We'll set the flash image, which is here, to true. And our flash timer is going to then start. However, we've not got a timeout for this, so we're going to put that in now. So if you go to your timer, go to your signals, go to your timeout, make sure it's on player, connect. And I'm just going to make this false. So what's going to happen is it will be true for 100 milliseconds, then it will time out and it will no longer be true. And it just blinks a nice little flash. So we define the zombie as an entity. We get the raycast, we get the collider, which is area 2D, and we know that the area 2D's parent is the zombie, and we return that into the zombie as an entity. We then create blood, which I'll do in a second. We remove 1 life from the zombie, and then we check if the zombie's life is less than 1. If it is, of course, it's dead, so we start the timer, just as we did in the grenade, and we covered it earlier. So let's put in the blood now. Here we've got the create blood. So you'll see here we just passed the zombie we shot into this create blood, and it's as simple as spawning the blood particles and put it at the position of the zombie we've just hit. We'll also make sure that the Z index is at 100, so it's closer to the player than it is the floor, so you can see it. And lastly, for the player, if you notice in the zombie, we've got something down here called player do hurt. However, we're calling a function that doesn't exist, so we're going to put that in now. And we'll say if the player is dead, then we return we can't do hurt because the player is dead. However, if he isn't dead, then of course we're just going to minus 1 life, and we'll check that, hey, are we dead now? And then we'll set it to true if we are. We'll play the sound, player hurt, and while we're hurt, we'll make sure we can't be hurt again, so we set it to false. And then we'll make the alpha half, so it's kind of half see-through. It's just a nice symbol to the player to say, hey, you're currently invincible. We'll wait 1 second, and after that second's done, we'll return back to being able to be hurt, and the alpha channel goes back to normal. So that's all the code. Let's set up the main scene. Add in a player. Add in floor. I like to lock the floor so I can move the player easy, make sure the player isn't inside the background loop, and then put the player, say, in the middle. I realised I made a little bit of a mistake, so what we're going to do is go back to entity, and what I've done here is I've put the 1 at the wrong place. It should have been in front of zombie. So I'm going to change that. We go through each one. Awesome, now they're editing. Let's save that, go back to main. I'm before starting, I'm going to make sure the background loop is actually turned down. This is quite a loud one, and you won't be able to hear me. And let's play it. So it works. I can throw my grenade. I can hold my shift. And then what should happen is we just saw 5 then. Wave complete. Fight. And then 10. What if you wanted to add another zombie in? Like, is that going to be a lot of work? Well, let's find out. So we're going to go to our animations, find your entity, animated sprite, and we'll just put in 2 more animations. So zombie 3, dead, zombie 3, walk. Then I'm going to mix this up. I'm just going to use a dog. So this is the dead animation, and for the walk animation, we'll do that. In fact, for the walk, let's make them a little bit quicker. Don't forget on the dead to make sure it's not looped. And now it's a simple case of going to the script, go to the zombie script, and you'll notice that here, if I change this to 3, it should be as simple as that. There they are. That concludes in this tutorial. It's a really long one, so if you made it to the end, congratulations, and I appreciate it. I'll see you in the next one. Bye bye.